Mandla, today we are talking about the title Refined by Fire, the melting furnace for tougher businesses. What situations or fires result in a refining process?
If you look at the way fire works when you are refining any precious metal, you need to generate really high heat for you to achieve your objectives. And it's like that for businesses as well. There's certain innovations that you can do organically. It's expected that most businesses will always be finding ways to become leaner and more efficient and improve what they do compared to previous practices.
Hmm.
But there's certain things that can only happen when you are going through a fire, and that opens up a whole new level of innovation. So, in other words, certain things will only be triggered once there's an external stimulus, such as an economic recession, for example. So, these situations that result in a refining process are things that you wouldn't choose to have if you were given the choice, but they are so helpful. And they include things like changes in technology. The the change in technology where cameras used to be on film and they moved to digital. That wasn't pleasant for some businesses, and some businesses died because of it. But it opened up a lot more scope for other businesses. If you look at the whole smart cell phone industry, there's changes in customer needs, there's changes in energy sources,
Hmm.
the transition from fossil fuel to green fuel. That's also going to be a refining process, and it might have casualties, but it will have benefits as well. And there's also changes in labor supply. The last pandemic resulted in a shortage of pilots, and airline companies retired the Airbus A380 were forced to bring it back because they realized that if you are short of pilots, rather fly a bigger plane.
Wow, yes.
Yeah, so those are the sort of situations that cause you to refine, and refining is not normally voluntary. No one wants to be refined, but yeah, life happens.
Yeah, refining can definitely be a painful or maybe uncomfortable process sometimes. So, can you share a story of a business that has been refined and came out with a clearer sense of identity and direction?
One example is Apple, and I'll talk about them for a moment because they are one of the world's biggest companies by value, and at some stages they have been the very biggest. And there have been several books about the Apple journey. One example is Apple Confidential 2.0, which was written by Owen W. Lindsmeyer. And he provided a history of Apple. What we often forget is that in the 90s, Apple was failing. They had released products like the Newton personal digital assistant.
Can't even remember that.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. It came and it went so quickly. And its early promise was that it was meant to interpret your handwriting. It had those small handwriting areas where you had to write between two lines and then to convert that to text.
Okay.
That didn't fly. And then they'd also released the Macintosh LC, and that also was a damp landing in the market. And because of those product failures, they were nearing bankruptcy. But they significantly refined themselves. They streamlined product lines towards the end of the 90s, early 2000s. They released the iMac, the iPad. Uh, yeah, who doesn't remember what impact the iPad had when it was released?
Mm.
And before the iPad, it was the iPod, the iPhone. We tend to forget that when the iPhone was released, it came into a market that was dominated by BlackBerry, and the likes of Nokia were also still there. And Apple quickly took all that market share and beyond. So that refining process It also included revolutionizing consumer behavior. They opened up retail stores with a very particular brand image and a very particular user experience that they were focusing on. And internally, they had a very disciplined approach to managing their finances. I'd say in that example, Apple came out with a much clearer sense of identity and clear direction in terms of who they are and what is the Apple way.
Yes.
I'd say if they hadn't gone through that refining process and those challenges, maybe they wouldn't have been as big and as focused as they are. So sometimes for a business leader, perhaps the question should be, what difficult situations can I avoid? I think the question should be rather that when the difficult situations come, how can I use them to refine myself as a leader and also to refine my business or my department, including the people that I work with.
That's very interesting. So, how does the concept then of refinement through fire apply to the transformation of a business model, say during economic downturns?
When refining happens, it will melt your exterior until you're left with just the pure elements, the core. So if you recycle old metal, for example, and you put it through refining, what will fall away will be the rusted paint and all the things that have eaten away that metal, and you'll be left with the pure metal. So from a business perspective, the importance is to work out what are the layers that you've accumulated over time that you don't really need. When I say layers, it could be business practices, for example, that you've adopted that are now outdated. It could be many layers of products that no longer serve a valid market need. It could be pet projects that you've adopted that you now realize are not core to the business.
Okay, so with that in mind, how can refining challenges serve as catalysts for growth and innovation? I think we touched on that with the Apple story.
The biggest catalyst happens mentally.
Oh, okay, that's
And
interesting.
when you go through a refining process, you actually create more mental space to be able to grow and innovate. And if things are going well, logically, you're not going to spend 2-3 days searching for answers, searching for new ways of doing things, because it's not necessary. You're doing well. But when those times of refining come, I think you'll be a lot better attuned to the new possibilities that you didn't give enough time, that could actually launch you to innovate and to grow from that innovation.
Okay, and then in what ways can business leaders maintain their vision and purpose when navigating through refining?
The purpose is largely seen through the value that you want to provide to your end user. Even if the technologies change, the purpose remains the same. If you look at the telecommunications industry, the way that people communicate has changed drastically in the last 30, 40 years. We used to rely on fax machines and high use of landlines, and we also used to send things by post.
Yeah.
And those underlying purposes haven't changed. Just as we did in the 1980s, 1990s, in this year, we still need to communicate to suppliers, customers, friends, and relatives, but we now have different ways of doing that. So if you're a telecom company and you've been around for 50 years, your vision and purpose is still the same. You want to help people connect. But the way that you do it has now changed significantly in terms of how we communicate now. And I wouldn't be surprised if we roll forward 20 years from now, maybe there'll be a totally different type of communication, perhaps like these Apple Vision Pro glasses that you put would have become mainstream and slimmer and adopted, and people are now communicating with computers attached to their eyes.
That sounds like something out of your science fiction novel, The Fallen Angel.
Yes, yeah, and hopefully not in a dystopian way and where our society has collapsed, but perhaps it might be positive changes.
Absolutely. And how can companies reassess their values and operations to emerge stronger when they go through a refining process?
The first area to look at is how are you currently configured? And that's what I call an as-is map of your business. You can't change and storm into the future if you don't know how you are or who you are at the moment. So it's important to map your as-is in terms of processes and products. And then from there, you can then see what your to-be is going to be. So if you know what you'll be and you know what you are now, it's then easier to work out what things do you need to shave off to move from the current to the future. It's a deliberate process. You have to do it systematically. You need to document in a lot of detail so that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. And you can keep the core elements whilst becoming the future version of yourself and of
I
your
like that.
business.
I like that very much. So let's close by reflecting on the book Conquer Your Mountains. What role does faith play in business decisions and perseverance through financial hardships?
Yeah, so week 34 of Conquer Your Mountains says, gold goes through fire to be refined, is a mantra that was drummed into me since teenage years. This is one of those statements that sound false when you're in a dark situation, but absolutely true when you have emerged and are ready to take stock of why God let you go through that dark time.
I think that's something for all of us to hold on to at times. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us today. My name is Amanda de Wit, and I am the senior editor at Luca, the faith and inspiration imprint of Penguin Random House South Africa.
And I am Mandla Moyo, the author of an inspirational book called Conquer Your Mountains, as well as a science fiction book called The Fallen Angel.